My name is Faribus Zeli. I'm moderating this, and I have the great pleasure. We have with us Andrea Nardi. She will present together with her colleague Catalina for her to tune in, right? And then we have Claudia Eduarte Lima. She's also also from Lund University, but she's working at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights in Lund. And then we have Andrea Mariana Dominguez Noriega from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. The topic, as those of you tuned in know, is environmental human rights defenders. I think we can take it away with the first presentation. The idea is that we swap. The first planned presentation was by Claudia, but due to some connection issues, Andrea and Catalina would like to go first, if that's okay for everybody.
Yeah, I have maybe only until 1 hour because I have to pick up my kids now. We have
totally understandable. Appreciate that you can be on board. We can certainly swap another talk. 1 hour is plenty of time. It's 15 minutes for everybody, so I will not take you last. Maybe I'll take my own presentation as last then, and you can go before me. Then you're safe. Or, you know, if Claudia is fine with you taking second slot, that's another option. But you'll be fine, second or third slot.
Thank you.
Catalina, welcome. And again, welcome to those that are joining us online. I see Peter Stutt and Dr. Rezal Karim. Thanks for joining us. So, Catalina, Andrea, if you're ready to share your screen,
yes,
then
good
go
evening.
for it. I'll read out your title. Or do you want to maybe say that yourself? I shut up and I'll let you
go. Well, let me share. Well, maybe in the meantime, we try it works. You can say the title, Fadi.
I do that. So generally, again, about the panel, it's on environmental human rights defenders. The first presentation will be on defending territories and nurturing biodiversity in Cartagena, Colombia, towards a situated cartography of environmental defenders.
Thank you. Now it's here.
We have it.
Yes. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see the presentation? Good. Okay, yes, thank you. Good evening, good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, what we're presenting here with Catalina is a fair preliminary thoughts that we have based on fieldwork that we've been conducting recently in Cartagena, and what we call a situated cartography of environmental human rights defenders. So the aim with this, sorry, 1 second. With this presentation, can you see moving the presentation? Can you see the second slide? Sorry.
Unfortunately not, no. Now it's there.
Yeah, it is moving. It is moving.
Great. The aim is to problematize a little this idea that environmental human defenders are only rural and vulnerable individuals, and that they are defending themselves against natural resource extraction. So these are the 3 central topics that permeates our thinking in this presentation. So with this, we want to enrich current narratives about who are environmental human defenders, and we see from the point of view of what can be named urban environmental human defenders in a city which hide biodiversity, such as Cartagena de Indias in Colombia, in the Caribbean Colombian. So we want to visualize then these diverse types of strategies, collective strategies that defenders they use to defend their territories, but also to care about nature, natural environment from their situated experience. And in this case, in this presentation, we are focusing on those that we see as racialized others in the context of the very segregated city and displaced rural people that they live in the peripheries of Cartagena. So our research questions are 2 in this case. How do people in urban and peri-urban contexts, using Cartagena as an example, protect collectively the natural environment? As I said before, what can we learn from these movements in the cities? And as scholars then, what can we learn from their experience to support also environmental human rights narratives that visualize urban biodiversity, right? Because sometimes if we put the focus on rural and natural resource extractions, we miss maybe other problems that are also connected with extractivism and violence, but in urban areas. Yes, Catalina.
So, why we wanted to think this in Cartagena? Cartagena is a pretty special city located in the north of Colombia. It's one of the cities connected with the big Caribbean, and it's a city that is pretty special, as well as some cities in the tropical and subtropical zone. In this city, you can find different ecosystems that are key ecosystem connected with climate change and key ecosystem connected with biodiversity and with the connection between biodiversity and climate change. So Cartagena is the fourth largest city in Colombia. They live more than 1 million of people. That is important to say. Because 1 million of people implies that it's a big city with a lot of dynamics connected with tourism and with other kind of things. And in this big city, there are a specific ecosystem that is very important to understand the sustainability in general of the city. That is the wetland de la Virgen and Juan Pono, that is located in the north of Cartagena. You can see it here in the right part up in the presentation. And in that place, there is an ecosystem or a connection between different ecosystems, including the mangroves, that is highly diversified in connection with flora and fauna, and it's pretty important for all of the process to urban planning and other kind of issues there. Next.
Hi, why is not moving? Sorry.
So why Cartagena is interesting to think about environmental human rights defenders, because our starting point, and this is right for a lot of people, Cartagena is a really, really segregated city in the north of Colombia. Because at the same time, there is a global touristic sport, there is an industrial hub that is very important from the Caribbean in general. It's a city where more than 4 of the inhabitants live with less than $2 per day. That means that the poverty rates are pretty high in the city, and that is connected with a racialized subject, because a lot of these people are recognized as Black communities. So what happened in Cartagena is that Black communities, it's important to say that Cartagena has a long history of slavery, a long history of decolonization, and what happened in the city is like connected with the slavery trade. A lot of Black people ended up living in the borders of the city because the center of the city was promoted like as a touristic spot or as an industrial hub, like pushing away like racialized communities. And that is a long history of colonization, a long history of inequality, is now stressed, but rural people displaced connected with the armed conflict in Colombia, and is now stressed by new projects connected with high-income housing in this city that is very important. And you can think in Cartagena that is like one kind of Miami, but in the Latin America, in the south of the continent. Next. So all of this process of segregation, and this is a little bit our theoretical proposal here, is like think that the segregation and think that the climate change issues are connected with a long history of extractivism that are in rural areas, but that are interlinked with the cities by infrastructure. So we usually think that extractivism is outside, is in the rural zones, but one of our theoretical approach here is try to connect that with the cities and try to think about infrastructure and try to connect and think a little bit more about the rural-urban continuum, because this is pretty important to understand why people in there are defending the environment and defending their territories in a city like Cartagena. So in a highly segregated city, what you can see in the ecosystem, in the specific ecosystem that I told about at the beginning, is like there is a ecosystem transformation, like a lot of the deterioration of the biodiversity connected with water and soil pollution, urban expansion in different levels, ecological change, fluctuation of sea fresh water in the wetlands, and at the same time that is destroying the livelihoods or medios de vida or living spaces, espacios de vida that people is living now. And this is connected with a process of privatization of the commons of the nature that make the daily life for Black populations living in the border of the city a little bit more complex. And this is important because some of the environmental human rights defenders that we are going to talk about, some of these people connect some of their reivindications with climate change, and we want to propose that we need to understand the historical root of climate change to at the same time understand why people is defending the city or defending the nature within the city. And we can see the result of this in these two maps. That is just an example that what happens when you connect environmental problems with social problems. In the first map with red and yellow, you can see the economic vulnerability in the city, and you can see that around the wetland of La Virgen and Juan Polo, there is a lot of vulnerability, socioeconomical vulnerability. And in the map that you have in the other part with blue, you can see the future scenarios connected with flooding, and you can see how this intersects, how the environmental problems and the socioeconomical segregation intersects. And this is the context where the environmental human rights defenders that we work with, they have to defend the territory and defend their right to stay in the city connected with a nature or an environmental important place.
So in this context, then, in our central argument is that in such a segregated city like Cartagena's, where diverse socioeconomic and ethnic groups live and experience the urban nature in different ways, it matters greatly where from and how people defend and care for natural environment. So we need to understand these situated experiences of the natural environment. For some, it's part of their livelihoods. For others, it's a space of life. For another, it's a landscape. And for others, it's understood as territory. And these conditions very much the types of alliances, network, and activities, even narratives and possibilities to really make a change, to influence. So our approach has, in this line, also been situated in the sense that it demands from us being there where things happened. We have a qualitative research design where it was collaborative in a way that we did it together with Catalina. So I was tapping into Catalina's field, which also has a history of tapping in and trying to make it to follow up on what other researchers have been doing. We use diverse methods, but we try to make it participatory also in a way that we were not just doing interviews, but we also were making workshops, working with women in particular, and trying to understand from the situated experience of everyday life. Just quickly, I want to say that these different locations within the geography of La Ciénaga, as I say, as Catalina mentions, are very different historically in processes of land occupation, land use. And we try to choose from this geography 3 different cases, and from these we then will try to show examples of how environmental human rights defenders they activate different strategies to defend their territories. I mean, what we know as human rights defender has been conceptualized differently. One way to do it is using different UN policies, international law, that Claudia probably will refer to this later, which clearly says that individuals or groups who in different capacities, they strive to protect and promote human rights relating to the environment. Or human rights defenders working on environmental matters. So using this as a very contextual concept, we try to move forward, understanding that, again, it is from this situated experience that people defend their territory or nature in different ways. And as I said before, we are only looking into those, in this presentation, environmental human rights defenders that are grassroots or that are the racialized others, rural displaced people that end up living in the peripheries. This doesn't mean that there are, of course, lawyers or scholars, academics supporting these grassroots, but we are going to present only those activities that are done by these grassroots organizations in these different geographies around the Ciénaga. So I think what's important then here to say, like, if we ask how they are nurturing biodiversity and how this relates to the defense of the territory. We identify 4 different ways that these communities are nurturing biodiversity as a way also to defend their territory. And the first one relates to the compensation schemes, and they use the opportunities that are basically part of the international law. And also, and this again, Claudia maybe will explain better later, but compensations due to large-scale infrastructures, for instance, or high-income housing developments that demands that these communities have a say in how the mangroves or the ciénaga is going to be used. So basically, these communities, some of them tap into these possibilities, for instance, by making seed nursery for mangrove restoration, reforestations, also seeing reforestation as a subversive act, maybe reforesting where they shouldn't, or reforesting to claim territories. Another very interesting case that we observe is how de facto some of these communities created natural reserve that are not considered as such by the municipality of Cartagena, creating all the infrastructure around these spaces for themselves not continue moving into the Ciénaga, creating new territories. And finally, in a less specialized way, also through environmental awareness and education, through acts, through enacting narratives about the right to the city, but also very connected to nature and biodiversity.
What we want to say here is like all of the actions that Andrea already said are connected with a long history of the territorial defense. And this is because, as I said, Cartagena is a really segregated city, so there are a lot of struggles connected with the territory. But we understand territory like not just like a place or not just like a geographical division. We understand territory as the place where you produce life, as the place that is connected with life. So the territory is lived and felt, and the territory is the space of life. So this is important to say because all of these actions are connected with this, and in that way we're interested in include some geographical perspective to understand the power relations where the environmental human rights defenders are working with, and what are the strategies to care. So our main one of the main message here is like we consider that the defense of the natural environment is first and foremost a defense of the territory as this complex idea beyond just the land. And this is connected with the idea to create situated cartographies and think about the scale. And I don't want to go a lot this because we don't have a lot of time now, but what we wanted to say this is like it's important to see how the environmental rights defenders create and protect the environment from their point of view or from their daily space. So it's a situated cartography because they allow us to understand the connection between the daily life and the big structures that are affecting the defense of the territory and the defense of the environment. And our purpose was try to do a situated cartography in order to understand how the human rights defenders move between the continuous urban and rural, and how the human rights defenders are important to be understood from the idea of the daily life and the territory.
We have some things to discuss that maybe quickly we can say, but maybe this for later. So these 3 issues around the topics that we presented. Considering that in urban areas, then there are manifold types of violence and threats against environmental defender, which is also a characteristic of. Should we better show how vulnerabilities are constructed, negotiated, and contested? We should visualize better how violence in cities affect environmental and human rights defenders. Sometimes in the cities we talk about, I don't know, violence against gangs, right? But we don't understand maybe if these gangs are, how they are related to environmental care, for instance. And we don't see these populations as environmental defenders. A second thing to discuss in relation to this issue 3 and 2 are these considering that nature is more than biodiversity or environment. Should we specify better how research and policy approach nature as environment and how local communities value differently nature as territory? And finally, considering that economies and ecosystems are interlinked, should we be clear about positionalities and the geographical scale of our analysis when doing research and policy on human rights defenders? And I think this is important because it has, at the end of the day, if we as scholars, we use concepts that show how these struggles in rural areas are also connected with urban, we can also promote solidarity between apparent dissimilar issues, right? So I will finish here because I know that our time is up. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Many thanks to Andrea and Catalina for this interesting and I would also like to say very innovative approach with photography. I would then think of it, just double checking with Andrea Mariana. You said you have to leave when exactly was it? At 8?
It's okay with me, Fari. Andrea can go first and then I can go after her.
Do that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Claudia. That helps us a lot. Thanks for moving from first to third place now. Then Andrea, the floor is all yours. Just share your slides if you have any. Looks good. Looks like we just yeah, we can see them. So please go ahead.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Now I'm going to present about the role of the legal clinics in Latin America and the Caribbean in supporting environmental human rights defenders. First of all, we have this question about what are legal clinics and why are they important? Legal clinics and environmental legal clinics are focused in strong capacities, knowledge, skills for lawyers, but at the same time, they are focused on develop environmental legal real cases to contribute to reduce the gap of access to environmental justice and climate justice. Legal clinics work in real-world cases, public interest cases, and train the next generation of lawyers. So that's why this movement all around the university law faculties need to be consolidated and replicated. The methodology about environmental law clinic is identify an environmental legal case. That's already a challenge because there is a lot of cases and we don't want to do that duplicate effort. We want to articulate effort with different actors, NGOs, civil societies, communities. In this process, students need to research, analyze, listen, and dialogue, and also travel to the territory. Co-designed with this actor, the legal strategies, also found the synergies with science, because law needs science, needs evidence if we need to develop a stronger case. And finally, see the results, the lesson learned with the learning process also, and the next step about the cases. The environmental challenges in Latin America are really big. We are rich in biodiversities, but at the same time, we have something in common about deforestation, illegal activities, climate change, and also the threats, violence, and the persecution of environmental defenders are really high, are increasing. We have also this Escazú agreement that is really important, but not all the countries have ratified this agreement. We have this scenario that shows us how Latin America have increased the kills of environmental defenders in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Mexico also, how Latin America is losing a lot of biodiversity in the Amazon because of the environmental crimes. And there is a key driver of violence against environmental defenders that we need to face together with a collaboration approach. So legal clinics can be a strategic ally. Latin America and the Caribbean Alliance of Environmental Law Clinics look to have a relevant role to find unite effort across the region to protect environmental defenders. These clinics look to promote rights like access to environmental information, public participation, and environmental justice as the Escazú Agreement, and develop strategies not only to litigate, because there is also a possibility to non-litigation actions like policy recommendation, campaigns, advocacy that students and universities can develop together. This is a picture of all our team of the Environmental Law Clinic Alliance in Bogotá this year in our third meeting. Our purpose, as I say, of the Environmental Law Clinic Alliance is promote and strengthen environmental rule of law in the region through this legal clinic model. Our goal is consolidate and replicate the model, promote a regional collaboration between student, professor, and also local communities, and increase social and environmental impact by the development of legal cases. We start with 4 countries, Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Chile, and now we are 8 countries. There is also Mexico, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Costa Rica now in the alliance. The alliance is open for all the environmental law clinics in the region. The legal clinics can support environmental defenders. We are working also in the different legal clinics in cases to representation and support environmental conflict also. We are also supporting help to promote the Escazú Agreement. This is a really important tool, and provide also a critical legal advice and defense for environmental defenders facing this legal challenge or threats that they have in each country. The legal actions can be a lot. We sometimes present amicus curiae until the courts. Also, we work with the Ombudsman of Human Rights and Environment in each country. We work to enforce public policies, we give information for environmental prosecutor. We work sometimes really close to them, building capacities, legislation, environmental regulation, litigation. There is a lot of possibility of environmental law clinic. Here, this is a publication that we developed this year. We published with Universidad del Rosario about environmental justice and defenders in Latin America. This publication showed a critical analysis of the legal framework in each country, and the action also that the environmental law clinics address in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Chile, and how they implement this action to help some cases about environmental defenders. This is another example of how the Environmental Law Clinic Alliance are working declarations to call on all the states in the region to ratify the agreement, to the Escazú Agreement, and to take urgent measures to protect environmental defenders. The case studies Peru have developed. I am in charge of Environmental Law Clinic of Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, and we have collaborated with indigenous groups to fight illegal logging to protect the forest ecosystem. There is another example of Colombia law student working with local community to ensure fair public participation on environmental decision-making. Also, Colombia, la Universidad del Rosario have a really important role in their in the sign of the Escazú Agreement, and Brazil with the Environmental Law Clinic from Manaus, from the Estado de Amazonas University, they developed some amicus curiae to support environmental defenders. This is explain about our clinic. We develop a guide to explain environmental defender how to present complaints to the authorities. But because, as you imagine, the law is writing for lawyers. So it's really far away for the environmental defender, for the people, and we need to develop some guides and tools so they can understand how the process is going to be and what they need to develop to show how these risks are having an impact in their life and also in their communities. Also, we went to the authorities to ask about the budget to the authorities to protect and implement some measures because sometimes some countries as Peru have a really, really good legal framework, but they don't have budget to implement. So that shows us that there is not a really prioritization with the political authorities. And finally, we developed a legal opinion about a law that the Congress was proposing about environmental defenders. And we give some support and address some legal problem about this law that need to be improved. This is also a picture about a field trip that we did with Environmental Law Clinic by the support of the EPIC network. We went to Madre de Dios, it's a region in the Amazon, and talked with environmental defenders. We went to their territory, and for them it was really important that the students went there to listen in a close meeting and understand their problems. And it was really impact how the environmental defenders told us that a paper, the legal framework, don't stop the risk that they have all the days. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I think I passed one. Okay. Oh. Okay, now, sorry. The strengthening environmental defenders through the legal education for the environmental law clinics is really important than to provide law students the tools to become environmental advocates. Generate a new generation of lawyers with a sustainability focus. And for this, we know that we need a collaboration approach. We need to also exchange knowledge, strategies, best practice. So the Environmental Law Clinics Alliance is also a place that we can share all of these build better protection for the environmental defenders. This is some of the student testimonies about how this kind of methodology really make a difference in their career and how they understand the relation with environmental defenders and environmental justice. In the Environmental Law Clinic Alliance, we are working also to continue working of environmental defenders, the Escazú Agreement, biodiversity. Now we have the scope of biodiversity and how Environmental Law Clinic can support biodiversity. We are looking to not only exchange knowledge or experience, also to develop cases together, because we are looking that the environmental problem in all the region are really similar, and develop also publications, paper, academic data to show how students are making a difference in these cases. The challenge that we are facing, the legal clinics are different. We have some limited funding resource. The environmental defenders, we know that are in a highly dangerous context, and we know that the government may lack a strong legal framework. But at the same time, we know that with a good partnership, with a collaboration approach, we can do a lot. And we need to expand in this legal clinic model and increase the international collaboration. Finally, we find these years, we start with environmental law clinics in 2019, that these kind of networks are vital to improve the environmental justice in Latin America. These help to build a better and a strong rule of law, environmental rule of law in our continent, and we need to continue support Escazú Agreement. To end my presentation, this is one question that I have, and maybe we can reflect together. How can we, as a global academic community, unite? We can not only share knowledge, but only have active support to those that are in front of these lines of environmental defenders and defending our planets. So I think that this model can help in this process. Thank you so much. And this is the QR code for this presentation.
Wonderful, Andrea, Mariana. Thanks very much. Nice to see Madre Dios. I worked there years back. So maybe I'll come back to that. Great engagement that you showed us here. And well, I can't come back with some questions because you have to leave us. How long do you still have? Like 20 minutes or so, right? That's good enough for Claudia's presentation, which is great. And then I hope we are in touch. Thank you for joining us today. It's great.
Thank you so much.
And without further ado, let's move to Claudia EHRD Lima. I introduced her before. I think everybody was present, but she's also a colleague from Lund University, like Maria Andrea Nardi is, and she's based at the Wallenberg Institute. Claudia.
Thank you, Fari. So we're called to assist Dad, to heal her wounds, and in the process, heal our own. This will happen if we see the need to revive our sense of belonging to the broader family of life. This is a quote by Wangari Maathai, and something that I love of this quote is that it really highlights these interconnections between how individually and collectively we can engage in these actions which are helping us reconnect with the biosphere, reconnect with each other, and advancing peace in these moments where that is very much needed, although this quote is from when Wangari Maathai, 2004, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So my presentation will address the question on how can the realization of the rights of biosphere defenders help prevent the massive destruction of ecosystems, and thereby also prevent the massive violations of human rights. The theoretical framework that I use is based on the Defend Biosphere framework that I developed together with Andrea Nardi, who is here, and also another colleague, Lisa Barumo. And what we do in that framework, we take the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, specifically the chapter on sustainability pathways and transformation, and weave it together with human rights law and with the Convention of Biological Diversity. And we also build these in terms of highlighting how law is actually playing out in practice. So not only referring to the legal provisions, but also experiences of law in action. And for this presentation in particular, I also built another framework that I have been doing with in the context of the prevention project, making prevention a reality. But who are these biosphere defenders, and why use the term biosphere defenders? So by biosphere defenders, I refer here to both individuals, but also collectives to engage in these just pathways for sustainability. They can be using the law, human rights law, nature rights, and other strategies, advocacy, among others, to achieve sustainability. And why biosphere? Well, it's really an ontological point that I want to make with it, that we are talking about not seeing ourselves as humanity separated from nature, but really intertwined and part of the biosphere. So humanity, as part of the biosphere, allows us to see ourselves in not only the present, but also the future. So this issue of scale as well. we saw from Andrea and Catalina these very grounded realities that we need to take into account, but also how Andrea showed us that these grounded realities are very much linked to process of solidarity, not only in relation to the state, but also in relationship between academia, defenders, across, in this case, Latin America and the Caribbean. So I want to highlight this dimension. And also beyond, when we are talking, I know we're not here all lawyers, but in terms of environmental law, we will be having the COP very soon. So people are, I'm an expert on the Convention of Biological Diversity, or I'm an expert on the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, or I'm a human rights lawyer. So the idea here is that we go beyond those silos and we see how law can be a catalyst for positive change. And by doing that, really highlight this prevention approach. So prevention, not only as a due diligence that we need to have, but as a paradigm shift that goes beyond an emergency discourse. So when we're talking about environmental human rights defenders, it's often in this emergency, how can these killings, these threats can be over? And of course, there's a need, an urgent need to address that. However, we also need to see them as agents of change of healthy biodiversity and ecosystems, safe climate, when we're talking about climate adaptation, climate mitigation. And by doing so, we will be having this idea of law, not only as ex post, when we talk about ex post in law, it's as a redress mechanism, but really as avoiding the violations before. And this is critically important in the context of biodiversity, ecosystems, because once the damage is done, it's often irreversible. My second point is in terms of this emphasis on civil and political rights when we're talking about environmental human rights defenders. So if we see the Escazú agreement that Andrea was also mentioning with the Article 9, it refers more explicitly to what we should, normally as lawyers consider as civil and political rights. But here, my point is that we need to weave them and really connect it with a new understanding also of economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights. So they really go into this transformative mode, because people are often just tired of participating in one more meeting or accessing information in this complex web of information if that's not delivering a safe climate, a healthy biodiversity and ecosystems, food to the table to their families, clean water that they can drink. So really make this connection between procedural and substantive. And my final point is regarding intersectionality. So we see that the intersectionality is critical when we are talking not only about these different levels and layers of oppression, but also what different groups bring to the table. Bring to the table in terms of, for instance, the youth. If we're thinking about just a small group of students that really triggered this advisory opinion in the International Court of Justice, for instance. It was a group of students that started this alliance with the Pacific Island Students Against Climate Change, and that finally managed to convince their governments to take the issue to the General Assembly. And now we will be having an advisory opinion that will be focusing on climate change. Just to give you an example of these kind of actions. And I think the most important thing and the most interesting will be to get into some questions even between ourselves. So I'll be very brief. But when it comes to what can we do in terms of getting this prevention approach in the sense of environmental human rights defenders or biosphere defenders really exercising their rights, I could say one is reform civil, administrative, criminal procedure. So it's easy that we just focus on environmental law or constitutional law or human rights law, but we need those, including when these laws are being abused, to criminalize defenders, such as saying that they are, for instance, defamating, which is a critical one that is often used by both state but also businesses. To find accountability, to really prevent reoccurrence when states or businesses have violated human rights. And this institutionalization of the defenders' protection, but also this enabling environment. And to consider that often these impacts of biosphere defender actions extend across generations. So we need this time scale really be considered. And finally, defenders are often underfunded. So funding going directly to their own endogenous initiatives are critically important. So these to really address this idea that Wangari Maathai, which I mentioned in the beginning, reviving this connection of this broader family of life, and this would help us enable also peace, not only between humans, but also with nature. That will be the topic of the next Conference of the Parties. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Claudia. Great. So I'll hold a big legal background on the situation. We got first information on these legal clinics also, and we heard from Andrea and Catalina a cartography. Thanks to you all for that. My presentation would have also been maybe the first one. It's more descriptive than the very brilliant and innovative analytical or analysis we just heard. And it's a work that I've done together with several other colleagues. It's coming out of a new project we have at Lund University, or based at Lund University, on environmental human rights defenders. I'm going to say a bit more about this, and I should also say that both Andrea and Claudia are part of that. And so let me share my screen now and get straight into matters. I hope this works. Let's see the slideshow. So again, it's a bit more of an overview. Can you see the slides? Yeah, perfect. And let me just things here. So this is particular focus also of our project. It's Colombia, for good reasons, as you already heard, and as I will try to explicate. So you see the other co-authors here from the paper. Most importantly, it's led by Thorsten Krause, who's also the director or head of our joint project. And then we have Britta Sjöstedt, legal lawyer colleague, and Juan Samper and Ana Maria Vargas Faria, who are two Colombian colleagues that based here in Sweden. So let's go maybe to the next slide. And unfortunately, now I can minimize finally things here so I see better. So I quickly want to tell you a bit about the background in the first two steps. So what's the puzzle here? Why are we doing this? And what's the background? And then, as I said, mostly descriptive, a bit of a recap of major drivers that you may be very familiar with, but just to give you a bit of a heads up of the situation in Colombia, and then also what has been done so far to respond. And when I say drivers and responses, I mean most of all the threats and the violence, and ultimately also the assassinations that are happening against environmental human rights defenders. So the major drivers for that, what's being done about it, and why don't we get further on this as far as now? So the puzzle, which I put a question mark behind, is that 7 years into the Colombian peace process by now, actually 8 years, there has been a steady increase in the levels of violence against environmental human rights defenders in the country, right? So we can also see the issues that environmental human rights defenders are undergoing here in the context of a peace-building process, or a major buzzword in the scholarly community these days that we also in an environmental peace-building process. It means a process that to a certain extent tries to address environmental issues like resource-related issues that are the source of some of the conflicts that are now being overcome. So we have this peace process, and yet we have more killings. It looks like a puzzle. I will make quite clear why it is not in the end, and maybe you already guess some of the answers for that. But before we come to that, a quick definition of what we understand as environmental human rights defenders. That's a bit tautological because that you heard in different ways already in the previous presentation. So just quickly, we follow Global Witness, who's arguably the major global NGO working on this issue right now, and they define environmental and land defenders as people who take peaceful action to protect environmental or land rights, whether in their own personal capacity or professionally. And I would also add whether personally or on behalf of their communities, which is a tricky question, by the way. So coming back to that. Why do we focus on Colombia? Because Colombia by far features the highest degree or highest number of killings of environmental human rights defenders, I should say, under any possible definition. Something I will show on the next slide. So you see some pictures here, maybe just to draw your attention directly to the Global Witness figure of 177 killings in total, of which 60, about a third of those that Global Witness registered, are happening in Colombia. If we look at this issue with different definitions, then we put together different types of statistics and reports that are out there, and you see the sources at the bottom. So not only from Global Witness, but also from HCHRs, UN rights, and also from a Colombian NGO called Indepas. And this is basically the numbers that we put together, and you see that under any definition, you see the different terms that the different sources use. We see an increase with a bit of a dip in some countings, not in all, for 2021, all the way up till and then, of course, figures for 2023 we still have to put together depending on what's available. But for us, this means a clear trend. There's no doubt about it. The irony, if it is irony, or rather the cynical thing, is that in 2016, year of the peace accord between the Colombian government and the FARC rebels, Global Witness called this year the by far worst on record. So what you will probably wonder about, and what we cannot offer, at least not in this talk, is numbers, but we didn't find them reliable, at least not in the way we compiled them. There might be a blind spot in our research here, but a question that we often get is, how were assassinations before that? It's of course a blind spot also because it's very hard to get proper numbers from areas that were occupied by rebels. But at least Global Witness ventures into that zone and has some data from before 2016, and they think that year 2016, which is the starting year of our counting, was the worst already, and then you see how things. So it's definitely a very negative trend and a very worrying trend. There's other statistics again, just now putting or condensing. Another graph we did, condensing the figures just according to the definitions. So not using, again, the sources here. You see that the numbers can differ quite a lot, but that doesn't mean that only 17 human rights defenders were killed in this time period. It just means that this is a term that was used fairly rarely to describe. Still, we want to be a bit more transparent that we cannot give you clear numbers because definitions differ, and also how far these reports are vary in the counting. But still, I guess these numbers make a point. I mentioned our project background. We're a team that has actually worked together already for longer in a previous project on environmental peace building in Colombia. But since April 2023, we have this new project funded by Formus. I still put in early stage because our fieldwork process has mostly just begun. We're still putting together literature review at these points, and we also had to organize a research process quite a bit. As you see, we are quite an interdisciplinary project. It's a great asset to have lawyers like Claudia on board and human geographers like Andrea. I myself am a political scientist, so we are quite confident that these different angles shed new light, new perspectives on the problem. Maybe I'll leave it there with the project. Now, why do we see these developments in Colombia to this extent? I put together a list of the usual suspects here of drivers, and I will come back to some of these in a few statistics. I guess none of them is surprising to you. If you look from, the activities of paramilitary rebel groups, dissidents, all the way down to drug cartels and new and old extractivism. So these are quite common aspects that we don't only find in Colombia. The very first one I like to stress, paramilitary rebel groups, that's a bit cross-cutting because very, very often these also acts commissioned by somebody else and hence in relation to issues you see listed. So let's delve into a few. One of them is concentration of land ownership, and I guess the numbers here speak for themselves, that we have this severe trend in Colombia over the last over 60 years, basically more than doubled, almost tripled the type of agricultural land that is owned, larger than 500 hectares, and then you see the last figure. And at least that goes hand in hand with an increase. Then, and that's one of the reasons that I thought you may guess anyway, why things are not really a puzzle, is that at the time when the FARC rebels were mostly demobilized, we also see an increase in deforestation in most of the areas that were occupied by FARC. So you see the dotted line on top, and you see also the dotted vertical line, which marks the cutoff. It's actually not the peace agreement. That's a bit strong. That's a bit weird. Sorry about that. It should be on 2016. But you see the steady increase basically already when the peace talks were starting. And that's probably what this line is marking, excuse me. Steady increase in areas that were previously occupied by FARC rebels, because these areas have now become open to all sorts of other issues that I just listed. So that's why maybe in the end, this is not so much of a puzzle. When it comes to the paramilitary and rebel groups, particularly dissidents that are still active in spite of the peace agreement, most of the killings cannot be ascribed to them, but that is simply because it's very dangerous to get to these numbers, and it's also difficult to get to these numbers. But of the numbers that are known, alleged perpetrators of assassinations that we again put together from these different sources, we see that paramilitary is actually even dissidents, and then we see the third big rebel group, the ELN, the National Liberation. So not too surprising, maybe in the end. And that's also why I said that these actually. For example, drug cartels. Cultivation in hectares. Again, keep in mind, 2016 is the year of the peace accord, so things have not gone down, quite the contrary. And again, possibly or likely due to areas getting accessible. What you need to know is that in Colombia, we have an increasing influx of Mexican drug cartels, so not just Colombian drug cartels, because Mexican cartels are normally kind of in the middle of the supply chain, so to speak, now try to actually get in control of the sources and use a bit of a vacuum that if we translate this a bit and look to what extent this relates to the assassinations of human rights defenders, just quickly, because I also am running out of time. This is the Putumayo province, right? And what you see is that this has the highest degree of assassinations per 100,000. Then another reason mentioned is extractivism. Here, just quickly mentioning this, not only about old extractivism, it's also very much about new extractivism. One case in point is Mocoa, which is in the Putumayo department that I just showed. Rather a copper mine that is 10 kilometers away from Mocoa, and this is the largest copper resource we have in Colombia right now. It's also one of the world's largest molybdenum resources, and both obviously are metals that are being used for the more modern types of uses like cars. And we have a big multinational from Canada that has come in 2018, already some decades after the copper resources have been discovered, but they came in after the peace accord and they were quickly given 4 mining titles and expanded activities, and that in an area which has the highest level of unemployment in South Central Colombia, with 77% of the workforce being in informal jobs, which made, of course, these jobs now extremely attractive and accelerated things. One important thing to know, and something Andrea mentioned just before, that I also found in other research that I did is that we cannot think of indigenous communities that are affected, in this case the Nasa and Inga communities, as monolithic blocks here, because the situation is very precarious for them in terms of working opportunities. Also, some people from these communities and working for these mines. It's quite a few, actually. And so the rifts and the fault lines, they can go through communities, which adds additional stress. Just some thoughts about what's been done to respond. I keep it very short now. I mostly wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on Colombia, again, more of in a descriptive way. But what we're trying to do and what we have to do more thoroughly is apply a justice framework or a concept of justice advanced by Nancy Fraser, which is called justice by recognition, and it basically combines different types of justices. So the argument is you need to have justice not only in terms of cultural and political recognition and representation by giving people maybe a voice or some seats in parliament, but you really need to also work on the economic distribution of welfare in the country. And only if you do put these two things together will you have a more sustainable type of peace and also sustainable protection of vulnerable groups. Yes, not too surprisingly, why we see some progress when it comes to these aspects, cultural recognition, political representation. We don't see much of that when it comes to big distribution. It's a much harder nut to crack. And maybe I should leave it there because my time is out. So just quickly saying that in the first years after the peace agreement with the conservative Duque administration, we didn't have much of neither. To be a bit quick in the analysis, since the new Petro administration has come into power in August 2022, left-leaning, much more equality-oriented, we've seen a lot of initiatives, including legal initiatives, to improve the recognition side, also the representation side for vulnerable communities, to give these environmental human rights defenders a better voice in many different ways. But the economic redistribution, again, remains an issue and hence also creates many enforcement issues when it comes to that's why we still are seeing these numbers. I think I'll leave it there, and I thank you for your attention. We now have 20 minutes left. We have also one attendee left at this point. So no pressure on you, Dr. Karim, but I would hold silent now and open the floor and see if you have a question. You can actually also voice that question directly. Yes, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Karim. This is a question for Katarina and me about the institutional governance and aspects in the mangrove case. I will ask Katarina to address this question.
Yes, that is a pretty interesting question, because when we speak about mangroves, we are speaking about common goods or public goods. So what that means is like the state is the responsible of the care of this ecosystem, because this ecosystem is in the coastal line or in a places with water. So it's the state that responsible of the care of that. But what happened is like this ecosystem has been affected and degraded by different phenomena that include extractivism, include local pressures to have land to build houses, for example, and include like a lot of kind of problems connected, for example, with chemicals or other kind of water pollution. And what is happening in this ecosystem is like a local communities, these grassroots organizations that we work with. What that is happening is people realize the importance of these spaces. I include the defense of these spaces that are plenty of biodiversity and plenty of ecosystem service, and they try to take care of these places as a part of the defense of the territory. So even that from the institutional part, the mangroves are like a common spaces, are not part of the private property. What is happening locally is that in this idea of territory, people understand that the mangroves are part of the espacio vivido, the life space. So in that way, they start to defend these spaces that are in theory just connected with the state. And I wanted to say that because sometimes we have all of these governance and all of that kind of structures that try to divide. As Claudia said, one of the ways to save us of this massive extinction or this massive crisis is try to understand that we are connected, that even when the governance structures in different places try to put different actors in the responsibility, one of the ways to go further of these divisions is try to understand the connections and try to understand what Claudia mentioned about the biosphere, or this thing that include everyone, that is impossible to divide in terms of governance. I don't know if an answer, but that is the idea and the situation of the governance connected with mangroves, at least in Colombia.
And maybe to complicate also in terms of policy, well, governance also different, since mangroves are in land, but also in water, they fall in between different agencies, so to say. And in the case of Colombia, there are different agencies looking water, looking land, sometimes urban land, sometimes rural land. So to have in mind that mangroves are a very particular ecosystem that they sometimes challenge the logics of the state's governance. But I don't know, Karim, if we managed to address your question, but otherwise you're welcome to.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it seems good, and actually the research idea and your presentations very nice. Actually, the mangrove forest is also look like the Bangladesh. Also, I am from Bangladesh. So here also including only the compensation scheme program, awareness, educations. Also, we know that in case of adaptations and mitigations, majority of the research are avoiding the institutionalizations that already Claudia included in her previous discussions, especially focusing both formal rules, regulations that may defend to protect the biodiversity, also the mangrove forest. And also another aspect is the non-formal rules. Around the forest area, there is maybe some indigenous peoples, or you said maybe the black people like this. So they have own non-formal norms, regulation, cultures. So these aspects are also need to consider to make the loss of deforestations or the water or soil pollutions. So it's need to also consider. So I just wanted to include how institutionalizations make a good defender to protect our the natural resource, which may be forest, water, soils, etc. Thank you very much. So this is my comment.
Thank you.
Right.
Fadi, I have a comment to you.
Please.
No, I know you have been working on this from a particular case in Colombia and to characterize. But I think what we tried to do with our presentation was to add to these characterizations that you have done of environmental defenders in Colombia, right? Because as I was reading your, and as I think we said, we could add a couple of things that it's obvious that you are seeing these from rural areas. And I think then we can continue conversation to see what can we add from extractivisms and probably more connected to infrastructures connected to those rural areas that are also impacting Cartagena, for instance. It has a huge harbor area, and is connecting now one of the compensation schemes that they were using for the community that we mentioned relates to a highway that was constructed to connect two harbors, the one in Cartagena, one up in the north, Barranquilla, which also relates to the movements of minerals coming from other parts of the country. So I think it would be nice to see to add to that debate on who are and how they are exposed to not only drug cartels but urban violence, for instance, or like the selling of those drugs that are produced in in the neighborhoods. So
yeah, that is absolutely great. I think I really think from what I saw today, groundbreaking. There's probably different ways to experiment. Changes in our project and beyond, because this obviously with different definitions of environmental defenders, right? To see and then, as you said, also to fine grain and fine tune a bit more what the issues are.
Fari, I think we can't hear you, or I don't know if it's just me, but you kind of
no, sometimes you're lost. Yes, sometimes
we lose you on the way.
I switch off the headphones. Is it better now?
Yeah,
Yes.
much better. Yeah.
Okay,
Better, yeah.
headphones. So thanks for letting me know. Okay, I'll repeat it very shortly. No, I mean, yes to everything. I think there's different things that cross my mind already that we can discuss on the project, like using different definitions and different indicator sets of what is a human rights defender, what are possible issues, because that also leads to more fine-tuned types of maps and diverse maps, and that can also show certain dynamic, and can also show the power of definitions and how politicized. Great potential. This is brilliant stuff that you have. And of course also using it in other geographical contexts within and beyond Colombia. So this sky's the limit.
So something that I'm puzzled about is this kind of catastrophe narrative often around Latin America. And whether it's the drug cartels or whether it's the killings of environmental defenders and so on. And how do we navigate that? Because of course it's there, but to what extent putting more the spotlight on it is kind of bringing us together as humanity, as building bridges between each other and trying to find our own kind of dignity, or whether that is putting more obstacles in it. And it's an honest question. I don't know. I think this violence needs to be understood, this needs to be unpacked, the actors and so on. And at the same time, especially in Europe, and I mean, coming myself from Latin America, I see a lot of, lack of understanding that even when there's a lot of media attention on those issues, there's just such a rich diversity of voices, of people, whether youth, women, and I mean, now we're going to be in Latin America, it's Colombia, but it's going to be with very strong Latin American presence. Just what Andrea showed us, this complete, no resources, and yet you have professors, students really doing a lot of stuff. So that's a dilemma that I see in this topic, a dilemma that, we won't answer it in 10 minutes, but I'm very curious to hear from you.
Does anybody want to?
And Fari, I think it's more for you because I have discussed quite a lot with Andrea, with Catalina, and also for Dr. Rosal, because I'm honestly very keen to hear other perspectives on this issue. I have my own, but I'm very keen to and open to hear others and change.
Spontaneously, there's two levels to your question, right? The one is, of course, are there good arguments to tell people? And of course there are, right? And we all know them. We know that this is not a homemade Latin American problem. You know, the whole extractivism, I just mentioned the Canadian company. I mean, who buys the drugs of these drug cartels and so forth? But I guess that's not where your question is going. Your question is going on the other side. You know, how much do people want to hear? And then we are, of course, back at larger discourses and maybe polarization. We see similar discussions about migration. I mean, it should be fairly easy to reach people with the argument that these migrants are coming to us, and I would say to our shores, and that's not meant in a cynical way, due to what, you know, so-called northern consumers and companies and armies and so forth are doing somewhere else on this planet. So same story there, right? The arguments are there, but some people don't want to listen. They want to sit, you know, in South London, or for my sake here in Lund, and they have their own opinion about migration. And I think it's a bit similar what happens in Latin America right now. When I look back at the 1970s, it was fairly easy, not perfect, but fairly easy in a wider circle of people, also beyond academia, to make a point that what's happening in Latin America with a lot of authoritarianism and so forth was caused by, yeah, aspects of the Cold War, but definitely by Western and Northern influence. I have a bit the feeling that we lost the narrative for now, just to be a bit polemic, that there is a lot of simplification, simple heuristics, and it's not a healthy environment. How to address that? It's difficult. I don't have an answer, but I can say the arguments are not good enough, apparently, right? Because they're there.
I just want to mention something so little that actually I think that concern is in our presentation with Andrea, and actually I think that we bet to make a situate cartography just because we want to see other levels of what is happening. And that is maybe one of our big proposals, try to see what is happening from below. Because yes, as a Colombian, sometimes is the same map. It's like, again, this map of the cartels, drugs, murders, all of that kind of things. That is important to see, you know, if without your presentation, Fari, here, our presentation doesn't make sense, because it's like two ways to approach the problem. But I think that just to say, like, maybe that is our proposal with Andrea, is like try to situate it, try to see it, what is happening, and try to show other kind of violence that are not just this big violence. It's like other kind of violence that sometimes are invisibilized or are just erased just because are not part of these big numbers. But yes, for that we need a lot of job, and it's a shame that Andrea is not here, the lawyer, because actually what she showed was that all of the solidarity that is in the academia to try to see these situate problems and how the academia can engage with that. I don't know if Andrea wants to say.
Well, and Catalina, I think what you and Andrea did was also show much more of this agency, right? And how we have biodiversity in Latin American cities. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, we don't have that in many parts of Europe, you know? So, I mean, Latin America has enormous challenges, but it has enormous beauty, enormous, positive issues. So that's the part that, how can we manage to put this puzzle in which we show both in a very kind of granular way, and yet that it's also academia's role, as Andrea was saying, how can we, our own narratives, our own proposals really help in terms of the concrete impacts on the ground. So yeah, it's I think the presentations in a way really kind of presented also these different entry points upon which you can address this very complex topic. So it's just a reflection on that.
I think it will be important to finish this panel thinking that as important to protect environmental defenders, we need to see beyond this and see them as agents of change, because our project is about that, right? The role they have as agents of change. And in our presentation from Cartagena, we try to see that, you know, how they maneuver in a very vulnerable condition and very precarious condition, possibilities to empower themselves and their communities, the leaders and the communities, against extractive economies, against high mice or tourism, global tourism, against high-income housing, real estate business. So to finish this panel with a more positive light, and also thinking our role, as we've been discussing from the academia, to create networks of solidarities between research practitioners, between communities and communities of interest and local communities. I think that would be important. Yes, just to say that.
Yeah, definitely. And this solidarity also across regions. And I was interested to hear also like these connections with Asia, for example. And we see that also with Africa, or as Fari was saying, the supply chain. How can we really approach that from a more systemic way? And I could say in relation to prevention, to give really environmental human rights defenders and prevention a fair chance.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's a good point. I think one option, like because you mentioned the change agent aspect, Andrea, is and that's strongly connected to your talk too, Claudia, is many of these international treaties that get a lot of limelight, like the SDGs, like the Convention on Biological Diversity with the COP now in Cali, they are very strong on setting goals. And they get a lot of attention for that. They're very weak when it comes to implementation and enforcement mechanisms, because ultimately they're not meant to do that. It's a new quality, at least in international environmental law, I would say, right? Exceptions apply, but some years back, you look at some older treaties, Kyoto Protocol, whatever, there was at least some sort of more specific guidelines, respectively commitments that already interfered with countries' implementation plan. That means that the implementation planning was not totally left to countries. Today, when we look at the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, the CBD Convention, there's always these national communications. There's the voluntary national reports under the SDGs, means nothing, sorry. Yeah, and I think, what did they deliver so far? Where are we, 17%, 20%? I don't recall, not much. On the road to 2030, we have only a handful of countries that submitted their country reports now for the CBD on the global biodiversity framework. Paris Agreement, we had the global stocktake last year, which was also not very, very enlightening. Where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is these people we talk about, they're implementers. They're change agents, but they're also, without knowing it, because often they're not, some people may not know, hey, you're just implementing the SDGs, but that's what they're doing. So maybe one of the missing links here is to just say, you're doing big talk in international negotiations, but these are the people we need to protect to get the work done, right? So maybe draw in an additional layer of protection for them by giving them attention and by framing that attention in new and creative ways. So not just saying these people get killed, but there is a genuine interest of the international community to protect these people, not just out of human rights concerns, but out of the very essence of why we are doing these negotiations. Maybe that's a bit too dramatic or generalistic, but I think drawing such connections can maybe really help supporting these people in an additional way. So we probably need to see things we don't have yet, other types of framings that convince people.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think it's about protecting more what they are, like their worldviews. What we at least try to do with Claudia is to see, okay, what is it at stake for them? It's not just protecting them in their bodies and communities of displacement. It's what understanding of what development is or should be. Can we learn something maybe to reframe SDGs? I think that like going more like to the deep causes of violence, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what do we have? We have no poverty and equality, and there's certainly some sub-targets that talk about violence, but there's so much more to cover here. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so
Right.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting discussion, even to see each other's perspectives. So
Yeah,
thanks
yeah.
also for
It was nice to
organizing.
talk to you. I've been largely absent from the project, so it's good to have this discussion. I will become better, I promise. And I would see
Great.
you, Claudia, in Cali. Let's make sure. I'm sorry our panel there is online, but well, it's nice to be part of it. But I hope we find a different opportunity. If you didn't catch it, there was Peter Stutt. He left a nice message for us. I don't know. Andrea saw it. Did you all see that message?
No.
Maybe
Yes,
to
yes.
end on that. I don't know if you saw it, Claudia. Otherwise, I think it's not there anymore. But I'm happy to read it because we didn't have much of an audience, and I'm sorry about that. It's a new format for this sort of conference. Normally, there should have been more. But Peter wrote, "I'm sorry, I need to leave this excellent discussion." He was having some convocation at his uni. And he continues, "I know the audience size is a bit disheartening, but this is a vital topic, and I'm sure more people will watch the recording. I know I will share it widely once available. This is an area where academia, research, activism come together brilliantly, and there is much more work to do as we try to understand the motivations and strategies of both environmental human rights defenders and their oppressors." So it's a very encouraging, nice comment.
Yeah, it was very nice. Okay, but I think we are ending, right? Because
Yeah,
I
we're ending. So
have to
thanks.
put my daughter to
Thanks
bed.
thanks to all of you.
Sorry.
You have a very good evening. If you are in my time
Thanks.
zone, I think you all are.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye
Take care.
bye.
Ciao. Thank you, Dr. Karim, for joining.
Thank you
you.
very
Yes.
much. See you.
Bye.